Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, after all the shows named after me. And I'm coming to you today. I've got a very special episode. I've got State House Rep Mark Hart coming on to talk about the special session that just concluded regarding Eastern Kentucky flood relief here in Kentucky, where they spend some money, what they spend it on, how they spend it, and I'm going to ask them some questions there. But before I bring them on, real quick, guys, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please throw it a review. That helps out. I am told if you're watching on the Facebooks, hits the shares, hit the comment. That helps out too as well. And as always, if you're catching this in a video, you can catch this as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else that you engage in podcasts as far as that goes. So you don't have to sit there watching the video the entire time. And as always, you can sign up for our text alerts. You can text the word Liberty to 33777. So without further ado, thank you for joining us, State House Rep Mark Hart. Mark, thank you so much for taking time out.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, first, we had a special session to help out Eastern. Well, before we do that, Mark, why don't you go ahead, tell the audience what areas you represent, how long you've been in the House, and just what your background is.
All right. My district is 78th House District. It is comprised of all of Pendleton County, 3 precincts in Campbell County, 7 precincts in Kenton County, and 3 precincts in Boone County. So I'm like the quintessential Northern Kentucky rep now because I have all the counties.
Which is interesting because, you used to cover like Cynthiana.
I was more Central Kentucky. My old district was all of Pendleton, all of Harrison, and part of Scott. Well, of course, Scott and Harrison County are in Central Kentucky, and Pendleton County is kind of like that border county between Central and Northern Kentucky. But, with the population shifting east to west and west to east and north to south, as they shifted everybody around, it come right up and got me and pushed me right up into Northern Kentucky. So,
well, and how long have you been a House Rep for?
I came in with the majority in 2017 when the Republicans took back the House. So I was elected in November of 2016. So I just finished my 6th session, and this will be finishing my 6th year as a state rep.
Now, I am told you are something of a hero. I'm told as a volunteer firefighter, you heroically risked your life saving some lives, and that's kind of some background. But what'd you work in before being a state House rep?
I'm a retired Lexington, Kentucky firefighter.
Okay.
Retired from Lexington in January 2017 when I came into the House. And I was a fire officer. I was a lieutenant with the Lexington Fire Department and a paramedic, and I worked out of Station 15 over around the Shiloh Park area, Fayette Mall, and that area of the city. And I also, in August 2019, retired as a captain from Pendleton County EMS, where I worked as a paramedic part-time.
Okay, and
overall, I've got about 31 years of experience in the fire EMS world.
And fire and EMS world. Okay. And what made you run for state House rep?
Well, actually, while I was working as a firefighter paramedic, I got involved I lived in Falmouth, Kentucky, there in Pendleton County. I got involved in local politics, and I served 8 years on Falmouth City Council, and then I finished it up 4 years as mayor. And in the middle of all that, I served Governor Ernie Fletcher had appointed me to serve out a magisterial seat where somebody had passed away. I was beat in the primary by 6 votes, and I come back and ran for my seat that I just vacated on council and got reelected. So I served as a magistrate for about 8.5, 9 months, and then went immediately back into my seat on city council. So
okay, so you've got a little bit of a background.
A little bit of background in local government, yes.
Okay, gotcha. Now, just one more little general question for you. What is, if you had to describe who is, I don't know, whether it's a governmental philosophical speaker or current person in office, who do you look at that everybody could kind of latch on to or research that shows you most agree with? Like I said, that could be an economic philosopher or somebody in office that kind of stays how you feel government's role is in our lives.
Well, I'll tell you, there could be several people that would fit that mold. But I talked quite a bit with Congressman Thomas Massey, and actually I talked more with his state director and some of his staff than I do him. But that's one of the.
Well, that's because we all like Chris McCain more. But
yeah, well, and I have to admit, me and Chris has shared a few beers together.
I'm just joking, Thomas. Okay, just joking.
Thomas is always up in D.C. He's never around. He can't come and join in on the.
I know phone. He's got the hard work to do.
But no, I mean, when I'm researching data for especially event or issues that are more on the federal level, that's one of my go-to people. One of my closest friends is Billy Matthews, who's the state field director for Senator Rand Paul. So when I'm looking to get help or get educated on some federal issues that are affecting my district and our state, that's two of the go-to people or the camps that I go to a lot, Senator Paul and Congressman Massey.
So we go into a special session here, and we've kind of covered some of this in prior podcasts where the governor sets the agenda. The governor has to call the special session, and it's used to appropriate funds as far as that goes and continue on the state of emergency for federal reasons. That's more of a technicality with the federal government. You have to be in a state of emergency there. But what is, if you could explain to the viewers how some of the pregame works. So, there's a lot of discussions beforehand, things like that. What is it like leading up to a special session?
Well, it's very kind of indicative of the issue that we're facing. Like this special session, the representatives and senators that represent the areas that were directly affected, along with people from the governor's staff, the chairman and staff from the Appropriations and Revenue Committee, they worked behind the scenes to prepare the bill that we ended up passing to get the numbers and to figure out what initially we could do to help monetarily to help the region. So in this case, I'm on the A&R committee. I had once when the bill was drafted, then the A&R committee started meeting and doing our things. Of course, the bill's got to pass out of committee before it goes to the House for vote, and same way in the Senate. So, but it's kind of indicative of the issue. A similar process happened back with the tornadoes in Western Kentucky. The representatives that were in the areas that were mostly affected, they worked with people from the governor's office and staff people to get stuff ready for when we. But we didn't have to go into a special session because that was right before we went into regular session. So it was more or less they were drafting the bill that they presented to us of their needs.
And so, one of the things that when we do special sessions, and I know, of course, you have your limitations of how you can address this, but one thing that, I always dislike is that the bill is prepared behind the scenes. You guys get in and you get out in a few days. That's okay. But, one issue is I feel like the citizens don't have as much time to give input because they don't get to see the bill quite like you do during regular session. There's several days the bill is there. You have times to talk to your state house reps and your state senators about it. So, one thing I guess frustrating about the special session process to citizens like myself is the lack of, I don't know, what do you call it, opportunity to voice their opinions?
And I think a lot of that is just the time thing. We're trying to get it. We're trying to get to one, when we come in a special session, it costs so much money. We're trying to be the most efficient with our time so that we spend this least amount of the taxpayers' dollars as we can. But like in this situation, this is kind of an emergency situation. We're trying to get help and relief down there to help them start getting rebuilt, get their lives back. So we don't have a lot of time. But I totally get the frustration. I mean, they do as soon as they get stuff drafted and they do a pretty good job getting it out to us. But a lot of times they can't release it. It won't be released to the public until it's presented in committee. And it's just a lot of times it's just a time thing. It's not the fact that any one person is trying to keep it from you. It's right. Just the fact that by the time we go through the process and we cross our T's and dot our I's, we run out of time. But I totally get the frustration when you're trying to follow and learn.
Right. Now, this special session here, there's really only one bill. Of course, you saw Senate Bill 1, House Bill 1 for our listeners there. As we know, you can do this thing where you have mirror bills in both chambers, so that way it speeds the passage process. So essentially, they're one bill, but the Senate and the House are able to vote on them at the exact same time. How much did we end up appropriating in this bill?
We appropriated, let's see. I knew he was going to ask this question, so I wanted to make sure I got you the correct number. So I wrote this down. We appropriated $212.7 million, and that was for what we called the Eastern Kentucky Relief Plan.
Okay.
And
$212 million.
Yeah, and basically Eastern Kentucky Safe is, I guess, the vehicle that we're using, or the fund that we're using to move the money around. And so the bill, we created the Eastern Kentucky Safe funding mechanism. The bill appropriates money to that fund, but we also appropriate money from that fund as we start helping to pay and delve it out to the people who qualify to get the relief. In essence, what we did, 150, and I'm just going to read, this is real short, so I'm just going to read this to you so I don't miss anything.
Sure.
115 million of well, let me back up a little bit. We appropriate $200 million from the Budget Reserve Trust Fund, and that's the state's $2.7 billion rainy day fund.
Sure.
And then we appropriated almost, I think it was around, nearly $12.7 million in fiscal year 2022-2023 from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund of America, Plan Act of 2000. That's the
and real quick here on that trust fund that you're talking about, that rainy day fund.
Oh, the rainy. Okay.
One thing I want to point out to listeners, and we've talked about this, if the Democrats had their way, that fund wouldn't exist. Let's be very clear. I mean, Bashir, I believe this last session, he wanted to spend every single dime of this.
He would have spent it, and that was kind of their plan, or that's their. They did it every year. Let me back up a little bit. In 1997, when the big flood hit Kentucky, in the town of Falmouth where I live, 2/3 of the town was wiped out. We experienced a lot of what Eastern Kentucky is going through right now. We got federal help through FEMA and different programs, the Small Business Administration, different programs like that. Me personally, did not receive any help from the state of Kentucky, but there wasn't no money there. There wasn't a rainy day fund like we got. The actions of the General Assembly over the past couple budgets and the past 4 or 5 years has helped us create the $2.7 billion rainy day fund you see, and we now have the money, and we're able to use that money for what it's intent for. Emergencies, just like what they're experiencing in Eastern Kentucky, just like what they experienced in Western Kentucky. So I'm very proud to have been a part of every one of the legislation sessions that helped create that fund. And now that we're actually using it for what its intended purposes, I hold no ill will or anything against the state. Back in '97, when I got flooded, they didn't have the resource. The resource wasn't there. We didn't count on it. We didn't depend on it. It was just the way life was then. But now we've created this resource, and it's a great resource. I mean, look what we're able to do for the citizens of Kentucky. We don't have to depend solely on the federal government for help. And so I'm very proud of that fact.
So this $212 million, $200 million of it came from the $2.7 billion rainy day fund,
yeah.
which and I covered this in prior podcasts. The Herald Leader wrote a little article about it, and I did not like the words they used. They said that the state can afford to be charitable. Not the state could afford. That they, meaning you, the General Assembly, could afford to be charitable.
Yeah, I don't
like that. I don't like that.
I don't like that word either, because it's not charitable. We're being responsible with the taxpayers' dollars. They pay their taxes to receive services and benefits from the state. We're not being charitable. The taxpayers paid for this. All we did was set up the fund that give them the opportunity to, or the insurance policy that they needed for when something happened. So I don't think it's being charitable. I think we're doing the responsible thing, and we're utilizing the taxpayers' dollars effectively and more efficiently for these types of emergencies. So
Well,
I would agree with you.
and I think we can agree that, you know, we both feel uncomfortable anytime people start asking government to do charity work.
Yeah.
It's not really their role. So out of this 212 million, I know I cut you off earlier when you were going through it there, to just rewind on the trust there. What did the money go to? What's it go
Yeah.
to?
Well, 150, and like I said, I'm going to read this because I don't want to miss anything.
Sure.
150 million of the 200 million will be provided to the Department of Military Affairs Division of Emergency Management to provide financial support to cities, counties, school districts, state agencies, and non-profit or public utility service providers located in the areas in the named in the presidential disaster area or declaration. The use of this portion includes reimbursement for services, personnel, and equipment provided during the response and recovery phases, cost of replacement or repair of publicly owned buildings and their contents, and advancement of funds to local governments, utilities, and school districts awaiting insurance claims and Federal Emergency Management Agency disaster assistance.
So do they, and you may not have the answer to this. So it sounds like that 150 million is going, in this case, specifically to government entities to cover the cost of, you know, whether that's the search and rescue additional costs. But you said something in there about covering costs until insurance reimbursement. Do they have to, and you may not know the answer, do they have to pay this back to the state once insurance reimburses them? Or
if the way the language in the bill, and I don't have the bill. Do I have the bill in front of me? Well, I'm not. The way it works, though, I understand. They, if the city, let's just say, if the city received $100 million from reimbursement from FEMA, they would be expected to pay the reimbursement back. If they do not receive the money from FEMA, then they won't have to pay back. And here's an example. Let's say they needed $100,000 to get their water plant up and working and get the water system back. If FEMA's, so the state's going to give them the $100 million that they need. If FEMA only reimburses them, say, $75 million, the state won't require them to pay the other $25 million.
But if they do get money in, so in a way we're floating.
Yes.
So a chunk of that is we're essentially floating the local municipalities, government organizations that are awaiting payouts from insurance or other places to make it to where the citizens aren't experiencing a lack of services while we're waiting for that money to come in.
Correct. You're absolutely correct on that.
And then, okay, so that's 150 million. Sounds like it's going directly to mostly government entities and reimbursement.
I might have misspoken. It's 115 million for that portion.
Oh, okay, 115.
But then we have 45 million to be provided to the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's highway budget for the state matching funds to pay for bridge and road repairs and replacement.
Okay.
And then we have 40 million will be provided to the Department of Education for financial assistance to school districts to support repairs of school buildings, facilities, additional transportation costs for displaced students where they're transporting them to other facilities while schools are being rebuilt, and the wraparound services for school children and families recovering from the impacts of the storms and the floods.
Okay. So we're up there to
200 million there.
200 million we're up to where it's going specifically, it sounds like, to mostly government entities.
Basically infrastructure type things, but it's not all infrastructure because, like you mentioned earlier, paying for some of the services that was used to mitigate the actual emergency and stuff like that. Sure. And then the other 12.7 million we're taking out of the state fiscal. Basically, everybody's fair. Everybody is aware of the ARPA funds. And so we're taking the 12.7 million out of our ARPA funds, and we're going to earmark it to Eastern Kentucky SAFE. And these funds will go towards water and sewer infrastructure projects, the building and replacement school facilities and housing sites not previously used, but now designated to mitigate the risk of future flooding. So it's more, I guess you would say, community-wide projects, but there is some money in there to start help mitigating some of the housing. There's a mechanism in there to help mitigate parts of the housing concerns that are now arising.
Sure. Now, and that leads into, and once again, you may not know the answer to this, but I did see where Senator Brandon Smith had filed an amendment to add an additional $50 million onto this package in specifically
Correct.
housing funds. What was, once again, now we're starting, and that's for me, gives me some pause because we're starting to get into government doing, it seems like more charity work, not just providing government services. But what's the thought process here where we can look at this?
I'm not real sure because I've not had the opportunity to talk to Senator Smith personally, because the House was in session when the Senate was in session. I didn't have the opportunity to listen to his remarks made on the floor of the Senate when he made this. But just looking at the amendment itself, all it did was it was going to give $50 million to the Kentucky Housing Authority. I mean, there was no stipulations, no nothing, just we're going to give $50 million. And I think, that's why a lot of people like me as a representative, I would have been very concerned about just giving $50 million without saying this is to be used for this, this, and this. And like with the bill that was passed, we have stuff in there. We have a ton of requirements. The way the money's to be used, reporting requirements. The money has to be. You've got to qualify for it for one, and then whoever receives the money, they've got to keep all the records of how the money was spent, receipts, and then they got to report back. And then there's to the state, and then there's a reporting mechanism in there for the state department. Let's see here, the State Department of Education and the state budget director. They have to prepare reports for the Appropriations and Revenue Committees on how all of the money was spent and where it all went. So we've got a mechanism in there to one, ensure that the money's being spent the way we want it to and going for what we want it to. But, with his amendment, if it would have been added and passed, there was no stipulations on how the $50 million would have been used. And so I would assume it would have just went straight to the Kentucky Housing Authority to do with as they seem fit.
And so that kind of leads into you mentioned some of it there, so I don't know if you have much more of kind of the oversight, the fraud there, because I know that there was some discussion. Take for an example with the Western Kentucky fund, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know if it came from the actions of the legislature or it was from these charity funds that Beshear sets up through the government. Which I've said this priorly, guys. I got to tell you. If you're giving charity money out, give it to the Christian Appalachian Project, give it to nonprofit. I don't know why government is creating a not-for-profit charity fund there, but Beshear starts doing that on these disasters. But we saw something regarding, for example, the trailers. They bought these camper trailers. They bought a lot of them. And they maybe didn't make it to people. They end up being auctioned off, or there's too many. And so there's some concerns about misspending of funds. And like I said, I don't know if that was out of that charity organization or out of the actual bill there. So is there any safeguard? Because anytime you start talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in government and these types of things, fraud comes up. And whether that is fraud by political fraud, as we've seen, Eastern Kentucky, the Democrats for years have mismanaged the coal severance money meant to help Eastern Kentucky, instead doing things like paying for Rupp Arena's scoreboard with the money instead of developing the area's infrastructure so they can better stand on their own 2 feet. What do we have in here to make sure that these funds are not being misused or handed out to people outside of, do you have anything outside of the general oversight and tracking?
No, but not a whole lot, but I can give you all some references here to where anybody can go on the LRC webpage and look up the bill for this session. It's the only bill for the special session, so it'll be easy to find. But to help to give us a mechanism to better track the money is one of the reasons, like the Eastern Kentucky Safe nonprofit, or for lack of a better term, that's what I'm going to call it, nonprofit, was established. Similar thing to what they did with Kentucky Safe for the flood. That give us a mechanism and a way to, one, appropriate the money for and disperse the money and keep a better track of it. But the bill itself spells that out, and you can go to page 2 of the bill, and it talks about how the money is to be appropriated for the fund, and how the money from the fund is to be, or how the money is to be taken from the fund and dispersed. It gives the qualifications that people have to meet. It lists who can apply for it. It's got a really nice breakdown of what actually happens with that East Kentucky. And then if you go to page 3 of the bill, it talks about who can receive the money, or it talks about whoever receives the money, the reporting requirements of what they have to do to account for every dollar spent. Where once when they get the money, this is where it goes. This is what we spent it for. That types of things. And then on page 4 and 5, that's the reporting requirements of the final reports that go to the A&R committees that I mentioned earlier with the state budget director and the Department of Education. So, I mean, it's a little bit wordy for me to sit here and read to everybody, but I would encourage everybody, go look the bill up. The bill, there's not a lot of legalese in there. It's pretty easy to understand and pretty straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. And so essentially the bill creates a, I guess you'd call it a government trust fund that's being managed. It would be what we'd call it, to manage those dollars being handed out to be reimbursed to these other local government entities. So is there anything now that you know of that maybe Beshear or the Democrats really want in this bill that weren't in there that we're going to hear them trying to attack Republicans over the next few months, where they're trying to claim Republicans are mean misers, that weren't charitable enough, that typical attack line?
The only comment outside of what was put in the bill that was a big talking point, and it wasn't just with Democrats, it was Republicans too, especially the ones that live in the affected areas. We're going to have to do something to help with the housing. And this is more, let's get the infrastructure back up, because there's still a lot of the houses are still being assessed. They're still determining what's going to have to be torn down, what can be rebuilt. And so this bill is really only just a temporary measure to get us to January. And then in January, when we come back into the general session, where you're probably going to see us passing another bill that can start addressing some of the more specific needs that like private housing and stuff. And that was one of the bigger discussions, and I think that's one of the reasons that prompted Senator Smith's amendment to the bill. But I think if everybody kind of stays focused, and when I say everybody, I'm talking about politicians, community, citizens at large, everybody just keep in mind, this is not a complete fix. It's a temporary bill to get us to the next step. And so with that being said, there wasn't a lot of we were, for the first time in my political career, we were kind of on the same page together, and I mean Republicans and Democrats. Most of us, once when we read the bill and we understood this was just a temporary fix, we understood what was going into it. So I don't know if you're going to hear a lot of banter about what we couldn't get in this bill, but I think you will over the next several months as we start getting the assessments in and knowing and learning exactly what Eastern Kentucky, and for that matter, we're still learning about what some of the issues at Western Kentucky. You'll see people wanting to craft a bill that start addressing them. So I don't think we're going to have the controversy or the discourse between, well, I needed this in this bill, because we already know that there's another bill coming in January. So everybody should have an opportunity to get stuff in there if there is a specific need that they know of. But of course, once when that bill's passed, as with every bill in politics, there will probably be chatter and
yeah, I mean, I've seen online some comments on some stuff about Republicans taking too long, dragging their feet. People are
yeah,
hurting, and look, we understand. People are going through some tough times, but at the same time, when you do not want your government reacting emotionally, you want them reacting as logically as possible.
yeah, with the facts. And right now, we're still gathering the facts. But what I read off and what the money was allocated for, we know these are issues that need to be fixed now. We need to get the bridges fixed. We need to get the roads back up. We need to get the infrastructure reestablished. And so that's what this money is going to do. And another caveat to this is the fact that we didn't have the ability to wait for FEMA to go through their process. That's why the state, we can step up and let's get this fixed, and then we'll
give time for FEMA to go
we'll
through
get the finances worked out at a later date, so to speak.
And then you may not know, and it's been a debate for I think many years. It comes up every session. What are we going to do about Eastern Kentucky? Historically, Eastern Kentucky had a lot of vibrant economy there as far as coal and everything else goes. And then when the 1990 Clean Air Act passed, it moved all of our coal jobs out west, out to the Rockies, and then which created the Coal Severance Fund, or not the Coal Severance Fund, the Coal Fund, which was meant to help develop out these areas and help do these infrastructures in place. Now, I know, and this is what people don't want to talk about, but Democrats were the ones who misspent that. I mean, they were in charge of those funds, and they'd spend them on things like Little League uniforms and things that help them get reelected, but not things doing the great stuff. And I know we got broadband coming in, but and we've covered that in this podcast, that contract is awful, and technology has caught up to the point where, for 1/10 the cost, we can get internet to everybody like now using something like Starlink. But, we're unfortunately stuck in that contract that the Democrats signed. But more importantly, as they go forward, is anybody talking about putting in place infrastructure to mitigate future floods? Yes. And then two, for Eastern Kentucky, is there a grand plan for how to address Eastern Kentucky?
First part, yes. There are some of the monies that's being allocated with this this bill is going to help put things in place that would help mitigate future disasters as they rebuild a lot of this infrastructure. So that is being talked about, and there are things already in the works. I mean, the million dollar question is how to pull Eastern Kentucky out of the grip of poverty with the decimation of the coal industry. But I think what you can see, the fact, go back and look at what we've done over the past 6 years or 6 sessions, almost 6 years, as a Republican controlled majority in the House and the Senate. We've put together budgets, responsible budgets, that's created a $2.7 billion rainy day fund. So that's an example. We're working, and we're looking, and we're learning, and we're putting things in place that are physically responsible, and that's going to help create other things and open up other venues to where we can help try to start rebuilding the economy in Eastern Kentucky. One of the things, a lot of people don't realize with the shutdown of the state, which I was totally opposed to. However, the one thing that we learned with the state being shut down with COVID in 2020 is the greater need for everybody to have reliable, high-speed internet. If we can get that established, not only in Eastern Kentucky, but throughout all of rural Kentucky, that creates another economic tool for them to bring in economy, and for people that live in these areas that are struggling to find jobs and work, another area or another opportunity to find a job. And when I say find a job, not just find a job, but find a really good paying job. And a lot of these bigger companies, especially a lot of these software and tech companies, that they're realizing they can have somebody sit at home and work just as effectively as they could if they had to travel to an office or something somewhere. So that's just kind of an example. But the push to expand broadband, that's going to be an economic tool that's not only going to benefit the whole state, but it's definitely going to benefit Eastern Kentucky in the way of creating a new atmosphere, a new avenue for jobs.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And careers. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, I think as we move forward, that's the question that's on our mind all the time. My Eastern Kentucky colleagues do a great job making sure that their area and region of the state is in the forefront and in the thought process when we start putting projects together. And I said we're going to keep all this in mind, and as we move forward, try to be more responsible and better spend taxpayers' money. Although I think we're doing a pretty good job right now, we always have room to improve.
Well, I'd love to see the budget come down. Yeah. 1 year. I'd love to see us.
We would all like to see
spend less money 1 year, but that's a different, longer conversation for a different time. Well, thank you.
That's a different show.
Yeah, I know. Right. That would be hours long debates there, but. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Mark Hart. And I'm doing a lot of this from memory from the meetings that I was in. Sure. And if I've misrepresented anything or if I confuse somebody, please reach out to me. If I don't have the answer, I will get you the answer and get it clarified for you.
I can say you're definitely a very easy to talk to legislator as far as that goes.
Well, I appreciate that. I tried.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much, sir, and I'll see you later.
Yep, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for having me on.
See you, Mark.
Bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. And it's that age-old question as we dig into it. What do we do with Eastern Kentucky? What do we do with these regions or inner city regions? What do we do when we have an area that has been decimated by prior government actions economically, right? We can talk about the EPA moving factories out of the inner cities. We can talk about the Clean Air Act in the 1990s, moving our coal jobs out to Western United States, financially decimating an area. We can talk about the tobacco fund. We can talk about how making the way they addressed hemp back in the 30s decimated Kentucky's agricultural side of things, and also how we address tobacco and the tobacco to the point where they constantly have to create these funds too to help break people from it. We can even talk about how the Kentucky farmer, the soybean farmer, is incredibly dependent upon China, as it's the #1 importer of Kentucky soybeans. And so what do we do in these areas where we've got, maybe most of the time it's not even the state government, but the federal government has come in, they've decimated an area. People talk all the time about how Kentucky's pulling in there more than their fair share of the federal funds, but what they don't talk about is how much the federal government has truly destroyed regions like Kentucky and in large swaths with the regulations. And what do we do? What do we do? I mean, we've broken an area's leg. And then how do we help them? What is the role? And a lot of people talk, hey, it would be more comfortable for me, certainly, if government didn't have to get involved in these situations, and private charity and insurance and everything else could deal with these natural disasters. But unfortunately, when you have areas that the government has historically messed with, what do you do and how do you address that? That is a massive debate and a massive conversation. And the only thing we can hope for is that we learn from our mistakes and we try to regulate less and therefore spend less as a government. And that way we don't have to shell out hundreds of millions of dollars necessarily. And you heard Mark talking about how they're looking at what they do with private housing and everything else. And hopefully we get to a point where we're not as reliant upon government to do that, but we have to learn our lessons from the past. And based upon what I'm seeing out of the Biden administration, they're not learning those lessons. Based upon what we're seeing with the EPA, they are not learning those lessons. Well, thank you guys for joining me for this special episode of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thanks, Mark, once again for joining us. And, I'm looking forward to next week here as we dig into it. This is the first time I think I've had somebody on this show in a long time to kind of interview. We might be doing a few more of these I might try to get on all the governor candidates, ask them the same questions, the same exact questions. So that way you can, as a listener, compare them. That may be something we try to do on the show. I don't know. Give me feedback, comment what you want us. If that's something you think you might be into, let us know. And, thank you guys so much for joining me, and have a great, great rest of the day. Thank you so much.